Clinical researcher Jeanette Bernardi, solicitor Francis Davies and business owner Nikki Does, and NHS communications expert Helen Butters had joined a rowing club in York, mainly to keep fit, they said. The women, who all had children at the same school, gradually came round to the idea, after too many glasses of Pinot, we're told, on a cold winter's night in 2013, that they would take part in the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge, which is acknowledged as the world's toughest rowing race. The introduction to a documentary on the Talisker race sets the scene.
When four middle-aged mums decide to do the unthinkable,
we set out with a dream.
Why not? Why not do it?
their families think they've lost their minds.
I actually said initially, no way, Jose, you're going to do this.
With a dream to cross one of the biggest oceans on the planet in nothing but a rowing boat. They enter one of the toughest races in the world, the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge.
I am scared. I am scared.
The enormity of the challenge is really hitting home.
The ultimate test of mental and physical endurance. It attracts extreme athletes from all over the world to race 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean.
It's so hard. God, are we ever going to get there?
Rowing 2 hours on and 2 hours off, 24 hours a day for weeks on end, the women will be pushed to their limits.
I miss my little boys.
Face their fears.
It feels like a survival challenge.
And discover strength they never knew they had.
I could easily just say I can't do this, but of course we can.
This is the story of four mums in a boat.
Well, in November 2015, they found themselves at San Sebastian Marina in La Gomera, one of the smallest of the Canary Islands, looking at the enormous waves and wondering whether it was all total madness. But they did leave the safety of the marina, and also 4 husbands, 8 children, 5 dogs, 2 cats, 2 snakes, and a gerbil. And for the next 68 days, rowed a boat just 8 metres long and 1.5 metres across, the 3,000 nautical miles to Antigua. They encountered a hurricane, attacks from flying fish, a visit from a whale who was a little too close for comfort, a chronic seasickness, and injuries together with a failure of the boat's batteries, a breakdown with the navigation equipment and the automatic steering mechanism, and more. From the start of the idea, convincing their families, raising the money, training and becoming fit enough, and having the boat, called Rose, and it was specially built, the story of these 4 women who called themselves the Yorkshire Rows, that's R-O-W-S, it's a play on words if you think about Yorkshire and Lancashire, and their journey is fascinating. Well, with me today on Sunday Opinion is one of the 4 mums in a boat, Helen Butters, whose husband now has come to work in the Isle of Man. Well, Helen, thank you for giving up your time on this visit to us to come and talk to us.
No, thank you for having me.
Now, at the start, I mean, we've already got the scene that you rowed across the Atlantic, the 4 of you. And I think you said once that if somebody asks you why cross the Atlantic, we wouldn't understand the answer. Well, try me. Why cross the Atlantic?
Because it was just an opportunity. And about 6 months before, I was watching I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. And I remember watching Melanie Sykes, who was my age, and she was in that programme. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, she's amazing. She's, doing all the challenges. She's beating all the people on the programme. I'd like to do something which would challenge me physically and mentally. And I think I put it out there to the universe at that time. And then about 6 months later, Francis came up with the idea, why don't we row across the Atlantic? So I just immediately said yes. Even though, as you can hear from the intro, my husband said, no way is she going to do that. I obviously didn't listen to him, did I? Because I did it. So I basically just decided there and then. I put it on social media that night. I'm going to do this, which I think is really important, because then there's no going back.
Right.
Once you've put it out there.
Right. So you were locking yourself in?
I was locking myself in because it just felt right. It felt the right thing to do. And even though this sounds ridiculous, at no point did any of us think that we wouldn't achieve it. And I don't know why we thought that, because it was a massive challenge to do. And it was a massive challenge to get to the start line. That is a story in itself,
Well,
really.
maybe we can explore some of it today as we have a little time. But just looking at the four of you, you're quite a mixed bag of backgrounds.
We are very, very different. And I think that's what makes us a really good team, because we all brought different skill sets. And we instantly bonded that morning. We all met at the rowing club. I had 2 hours to kill on a Saturday morning. I could have gone shopping or gone to Betty's and had coffee every Saturday, but I thought, no, I want to learn a new skill. I'm 40. I was probably about 41, 42. Really wanted to learn a new skill. The opportunity was there to learn to row. And we all met each other that morning and got in a boat for the first time. And we instantly bonded as friends. And yes, we all did have very different backgrounds, but on a Saturday morning, we put those to one side. We had fun on the water, and then went to the local hotel, had coffee and biscuits, put hand cream on our hands, and just caught up. And we just bonded as friends.
But of course, the ooze is not quite the same as the Atlantic.
No, we used to row 10 miles to Poppleton, the next village, and we used to think that was difficult. And obviously there's no waves on the Ouse. It's completely different rowing on the river to rowing on an ocean.
Well, now, let's come back to that later. But to do this particular task, I mean, going up and down the river and getting fit is one thing.
Yeah.
But taking 3,000 nautical miles in all conditions is something
Yeah.
else. Were any of you, did you have an athletic record?
No, we were all just four mums who all worked full time, all had children. You know, we used to go to the gym and keep fit, but none of us had any athletic backgrounds or any kind of endurance challenges. So no, we were just very, very normal mums really at that point.
So you did this, you got to this level. We'll explore in a moment, perhaps, both the trip and how you were prepared for the trip. But you talked earlier on about your husband saying, "No, they're not going to do that." No, well, you heard him on
No
the
way,
introduction.
Jose.
Yes. Well, he obviously changed his tune.
He did, and I think he was worried about me because, you know, I'd be on an ocean. It's a very risky thing to do. And he was obviously just very concerned. But I think his turning point came when we went to meet our boat builder, Charlie Pitcher, down in Essex. And Richard and the children all came with me. I was very keen that I wanted to involve all of them throughout the whole journey. And, you know, I'll talk about that later, but for the children especially. But Richard came with me, met Charlie Pitcher, who at that point was the fastest solo rower across the Atlantic. He'd done it in 35 days. His record has now been broken this year in this year's race. But I think it was Charlie who was explaining everything. And then at that point, Richard just said, "You've got to do this. You've got to do this." And he completely switched from being very negative and not wanting to talk about it. I used to leave the brochures on the kitchen table and he just used to ignore them, to actually being very, very supportive. And that was key, because we all needed our families to be supportive, because we couldn't have done this challenge wildhout them.
But that's the husbands.
Yes.
What about the children?
Well, do you know what? The children are so positive, and I think as we grow older, we lose that positivity that we have as children. Children have a very can-do approach, and we noticed that when we used to go and talk at schools. Children were, "Oh, great, what a great opportunity," and they were very positive, whereby adults were, "Oh, you can't do that," and they were very negative. But the children were... I was reading a book by an ocean rower called Ros Savage, and it was by my bedside, and I noticed one day that the book had disappeared. And I found it by the side of my son's bed, Henry, who at that point was 10. Now, Ros Savage puts everything in her books, so it's very scary. And I thought, should I let him read it or should I not? And I thought, no, I'll let him read it. And at the end of that book, Henry wrote me what we now call Henry's list. And he wrote all the things down that I needed to take on the trip and gave it to me.
At 10?
at 10. Things like ocean-friendly shampoo, which in hindsight, I should have listened to him, because if you read the book, you'll find out why. Waterproof matches, all sorts of flapjack, all sorts of food. And he gave me that list, and I've taken a picture of it. And that to me was him saying to me, Mummy, I want you to do this.
So you had 3 years to get ready.
So we had 3 years to get, yes.
And
So
that includes finding, paying and
Yes.
building a boat.
Yes. We were very keen to do this. Obviously, we all had children and families and responsibilities, and we wanted to do this in the safest way we possibly could. And we didn't want to, really, we wanted to spend the time doing the training, finding a boat builder, building a brand new boat. And also we had £100,000 to raise in corporate sponsorship to get to the start line. So we all worked full time. So basically we all got up an hour early and we all went to bed an hour later, and that instantly gave us 2 hours more in our day. Training. There's a really good picture of me basically in the kitchen doing a plank on with weights, opening the oven door and checking on the chicken as I was doing my training. So that just gives a picture of what we had to do in order to get to the start line.
Well, I can see how you had to become fitter. I can see how you had to do all the various things because you were about to take on an unusual task.
Yeah.
But raising money
Yes,
can be a
difficult.
more difficult task than anything sometimes. How did you set about raising funds, which was only a concept, was an idea, without anything to show people, like a boat?
I know. Well, we knew that people probably wouldn't believe that we would be entering this race anyway, because we're not the normal face of the Talisker Atlantic race. It's normally endurance athletes and men. So we knew that people probably wouldn't believe we were going to do it. So our strategy was to get the boat early. And we were lucky enough to get the boat early so that we could then tour the boat around the UK, so people could then have a look at the boat and they would know that we were actually serious about what we were doing. Rowing across the North Sea, which we did in May the same year, was brilliant because that gave us publicity. We were the first women ever to row across the North Sea. In fact, when we turned up in Sussex, Charlie Pitcher, who'd organised these races, had actually told us nobody had ever successfully rowed across the North Sea before. 2 Americans had tried to do it the week before and had to be rescued. So we kind of thought, oh. So when we rowed across the North Sea, we actually arrived and we did it. And at that point, that's when BBC Breakfast started following our story. And that really helped with people seeing our story and for us getting sponsorship.
Did you get it all together?
We did. We got all the sponsorship right at the end. We got all the sponsorship.
Right. So you had, however, having said that, having got the sponsorship, you had to embark upon the boat first. So that was a bit of a commitment, wasn't it?
It was a commitment, and we were just very lucky that Jeanette was able to bankroll the boat for us. And then we paid her back before we set off.
Right. So you went there with no boat, no money.
Yeah, we had no money and we had no time. And we had to make both those things.
So how do you go about getting the boat then?
Well,
Apart from the contribution from Jeanette.
Yeah, well, we researched boat builders, and at that point there were 2 boat builders, because obviously only 500 people have ever rowed ocean, so it's not that common. So there were 2 boat builders. We picked our boat builder and we sat down with him, designed the boat, and he basically designed the boat for us and fitted it with all the electronics.
All these boats are not the same then?
No, there are very different boats. So we had a boat which was made out of the same material as Formula One racing cars. It was very light. Normally the older boats are made out of wood. So this was very, very light. The risk of our boat was capsize because it's like a ping pong ball, basically. So the risk of capsize was higher, but we thought, well, we need all the help we can get. We need a boat that's quite light. So if we have good seas, then we'll go quite quickly.
Well, we'll come to that maybe about good seas later on, but you get the boat, you've got it.
We've
You
got the
started.
boat.
You started training in it.
Yes.
In various places, I see,
Yes.
both inland, and entered 1 or 2 competitions as well.
Yes. Yes, we did.
To get the hang of it all. But you go off in the North Sea for your first trip, even if it's an overnight trip,
Yeah.
and then you were afflicted with seasickness.
Yes, that took us 45 hours. We set off to row across the North Sea.
From where to where?
We went from Southwold to Scheveningen in Holland, and I was extremely seasick that trip. Extremely seasick. And I think I OD'd on seasickness tablets because I think I was asleep for quite a bit of it. But that taught us a massive lesson that we really needed to think and plan my seasickness for the Atlantic crossing, which we did. So we're so pleased that we actually did that crossing because we tested out toilets. We took lots of different toilets with us on that trip. Nikki nearly fell overboard because she tried to wee over the side, and obviously the boat nearly capsized and she nearly fell in, so she realised that wasn't an option. So we tested a lot of our equipment, and the North Sea has different challenges to the Atlantic. Obviously, it's the busiest shipping channel in the world. So we had a lot of practice on our VHF radio on that trip.
Well, all of it is good, but it was only sort of 2 days, wasn't it? 2 or 3 days.
45 hours, I think it
45
took us
hours,
to get over there.
Yes, and I reading your book, which I have done, you have some interesting tales about trying to take this boat on trailers up lanes that you shouldn't have done. And all sorts.
Yes, yeah.
To get it to
Golf courses.
Yes, across one. Yes,
across a golf course. Yeah, that was we put in in the sat nav, we put in our postcode. But what we learned was that with a big trailer, you've got to set it as a V8, as a lorry driver one, because it won't take you where big vehicles can't go. So that was the lesson that we learned, that when you're doing your sat nav, remember you've got a massive trailer behind you, and you can't go down little lanes. And I wasn't in that trip, but I think Nikki was driving. It was really, really frosty and icy. She was going down a little lane. She ended up driving across a golf course, so people were kind of standing and staring, and then she couldn't stop the vehicle because it was icy. So that was quite a tricky moment, but she did. But that was quite a tricky moment.
So all safe, including the boat. Yeah. Well, when you're setting out on a trip like this, and there's so many things to take into consideration, apart from those we're talking about now, but what you take with you, the equipment, the survival kits, your food, which we maybe come to all of that later. But do you have to take out an insurance?
Yes, it's very difficult to get insurance for doing something like that. But yes, you can take out insurance, and we did do that to insure the boat. Because the thing with the boat is the corporate sponsorship is quite clever, because people corporately sponsor you and you put their logos on your boat. But then when you finish the race, we sold the boat, and all that money then goes to the charity. So we didn't want to lose the boat, because that's a lot of money that would have been lost for the charity. So we did insure Rose, and we insured us as well.
So when you were leaving, let's leap ahead a bit, but we'll come to this. Your book actually does that. It starts at you leaving the Canaries, and then it goes to the build-up, and then it goes to you arriving at the other end. So let's go to you're there, everything's together, you're at the Canaries, and you're standing in the marina looking out to sea and realising there's 40-foot waves out there. What was your reaction?
Well, I think I remember Francis saying the Atlantic Ocean isn't an entry-level ocean. I just think at that point I felt very nervous and very excited, and I just wanted to do it. And like I said before, for whatever reason, I had no doubt in my mind that we wouldn't get to the other side. So I just wanted to start, and the race was delayed by about 5 days because the winds weren't in our favour. And the others were kind of, well, we're all ready, because you've got to be scrutinised, all your food's got to be scrutinised, all your medical kit's got to be scrutinised, everything. The boat's just scrutinised before you go. And we'd done all of that. We were all ready to go. And then we had 5 days and we booked ourselves into a hotel. And I just couldn't enjoy myself. I just wanted to get going. And I think it's because I knew I was going to be sick as well. So I wanted to get that out of the way. And I remember Jeanette's husband, Ben, who did our weather for us every day. He'd sailed across the Atlantic the year before and had been very sick. And he basically just kind of said to me, he said, you'll be sick until you can't be sick anymore. And then you'll hopefully feel hungry. And at that point, you know, everything's going to be fine.
Did it work out like that?
It did exactly like that. Right. And also he was talking about the waves, and he said there'll be 40-foot waves coming at you, but think of them as your friends, because obviously if they're head on, they'll be pushing you. And that's what happened at the start. It was a very, very fast start.
Well, with all sorts of things, you faced all sorts of weathers and all sorts of emergencies. But if you did get anywhere in that 3,000 miles into some sort of serious difficulty, what was the rescue plan?
Well, basically the rescue plan, it is an unsupported row, which is why you've got to do a lot of training and planning before you go, because it is an unsupported row. So you've got to sort yourself out with everything. There is a support yacht for the race, but it could be 500 nautical miles away. So if you get into trouble, the support yacht might not get to you for 7 days. So what normally happens is if anybody gets into trouble, which they did in this race, they're normally picked up by a passing ship. So a passing ship will realise somebody's in trouble.
There's going to be a ship passing.
Yeah. But that's what would normally happen. So that's why the planning and training, and it took 3 years to get to the start line, because you've got to do your Yachtmaster Ocean, you've got to do survival at sea, we had to do first aid at sea, we had to do all of that stuff because it is an unsupported row.
Right. So what was the significance of the word peanuts?
I don't know where that came from. That was completely.
It appears 2 or 3 times in your book.
Yes, I know. I don't know what. I don't know where that came from. I think it was just out of. There is no reason for that word. But one of the things that Charlie Pitcher taught us was, he said, when you get on that boat, go on that boat with a mindset of looking after each other, not yourself, because rowing an ocean, quite a lot of people do fall out. So they get to the other, so they start as friends and get to Antigua as enemies, because it's a very, very stressful thing to do, and it's very easy to fall out. Can you imagine being on a boat 8.5 meters by 1.5 meters, and you can't get away, and you're in a very stressful situation with no sleep? So it is a recipe for disaster. So we worked really hard and planned for not falling out. That was one of our main aims, not to get across quickly, but to get across as friends. So we did have visions and values, and that was one of the things where peanut came. So if anybody was annoying us, we would basically say the word peanut, which I don't think we ever said.
Oh, I was going to say, did it work? But no. Yeah.
Well, we did. Well, we used to have meetings every single day where we discussed everything.
I mean, not very difficult to have a meeting on that boat. That size. So it would be almost one permanent meeting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, you would have 2 people on deck rowing at one time and 2 people resting in the coffins at either side. I won't even call them cabins. But sometimes during the day, we'd open the hatch and we'd kind of pop out, and then there'd be 2 people rowing. And then if we had any issues that we wanted to discuss, we would discuss them. But sometimes we would make a decision where one person was asleep. And even now when we have our team meetings, if somebody can't make a meeting, we'll say, she's in the cabin.
But you had large amount of waves.
Yeah.
And reading the book, there were all sorts of issues there. I found the fact of attacked by flying fish was an issue. Was that an attack, or was it just accidental?
At night time especially, flying fish would just, because you can't see anything at night. If the moon was out, you could see, and we used to call the moon our bedroom light when it used to come out. But if it didn't, at night time, when there was 12 hours of complete darkness, you would basically be rowing. You couldn't see anything, and you got used to the ocean. You got used to the ocean waves, but then out of the blue, a flying fish would come and hurtling at you, whack you in the face, and they were really muscular and different sizes, and then they would be kind of flapping around on the deck.
What made them do that?
Well, they just fly.
Oh,
they just basically fly.
You were in the road.
They've got little wings, and they just basically fly. They're amazing to look at in the ocean when you see them flying. They are amazing to look at, and apparently they're in Antigua. They eat them, and they're really expensive. So we should have maybe caught them and put them in a cool box and sold them when we got to the other side.
Did you do any fishing on the trip?
No, we didn't actually. We didn't, but quite a lot of the crews did.
Now, we talk about these sort of things and the large waves and different weathers and everything, but the one thing which in a boat of this size would strike me as to be the most alarming was meeting Hurricane Alex.
Yes. And Ben, who I mentioned, Jeanette's husband, he did our weather every day, and he phoned us on the satellite phone and said Hurricane Alex is on its way, and there'd never been a hurricane in that part of the Atlantic for about 70 years. And Hurricane Alex decided to come. And again, we kind of went with the mindset, well, it'll make a good chapter for the book. So every time something went wrong, we lost our power. We used to say, make a good chapter for the book. So we knew Hurricane Alex was coming. We had to row as far south as we possibly could to get out of the eye of Hurricane Alex. But you can imagine, you can't row that quickly. And when we knew Hurricane Alex was coming, we battened down the hatches, we tied everything down, we put our power anchor out, which basically helps us from not straying too far.
What's this like a water parachute?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's an underwater parachute. Yeah. But when you put your power anchor out, which we had to do, and we hated putting it out because it meant we weren't going anywhere, you bounce up and down. You basically really bounce up and down. And the sounds were amazing. So we battened down the hatches, tied everything down. We each got into our cabins, 2 at each side, and we were there for about, the documentary's really good actually, because it just shows the conditions we were in for about, I think it was about 72 hours. The only time we came out on deck was to go to the toilet, which was a bucket. So we had to sit on the bucket in the thunder and lightning and storm, and then quickly go back into our coffins. And we couldn't eat very much.
You're tied on in some way. You've got a safety harness.
Yes, as soon as you go out on deck, you have to be tied on. So we had climbing harnesses and a leash, and you basically clip on. Because if you don't and you get tossed over the side, which is very easy to do, you'll be instantly lost at sea.
Right, now at this point in our conversation, we're going to take a short commercial break, and we'll return in around 3 minutes. You're listening to Sunday Opinion. When 4 middle-aged mums announced they wanted to row the Atlantic, their families thought they'd lost their minds. With an average age of 47 and 2 children each, the 2 women had no ocean rowing experience when they decided to follow their dreams and attempt the unthinkable and enter the Talisker Whisky Atlantic Challenge, which is dubbed the world's toughest race. After 2 years of planning, preparation, fundraising and training, Jeanette Bernardi, Nikki Doug, Frances Davies and Helen Butters found themselves standing on the edge of San Sebastian Harbour in the Canary Islands, ready to embark on the 68-day, 3,000-mile nautical journey, rowing across one of the most treacherous seas in an 8 metres by 1.5 metre boat. Well, Helen is our guest on the programme today, Helen, and we've been talking about your experiences on this trip, and you talked about the hurricane, but the hurricane didn't just sort of throw you about a bit and leave you not exactly in the doldrums, but unable to move for some period of time. I understand that your seasickness was still was a problem at that stage.
So, yeah, the seasickness started as soon as we set off from La Gomera, and we knew that was going to happen. So we'd planned to get some stuff called ultrafuel. Ultrafuel basically is like a drink that you drink, and if you can keep it down for 6 minutes, your body absorbs everything that it needs. So our strategy was for me to row for 2 hours on my 2 hour shift, throwing up, and then I'd lie down for my 2 hours off, and I didn't feel sick when I lie down. And Nikki would then make some ultra fuel, and basically, you know, I would drink that. That's not me.
No, it's all right.
No,
Sorry,
so
what
we
is
can
going
hear a noise in the studio. So then I would drink that ultra fuel,
Yes.
keep it down, and that enabled me to not miss a rowing shift, because what I didn't want to do was to miss a rowing shift. So that enabled me to do that. And then after about 4 or 5 days, I think Christmas Day was when I was started to feel hungry and wanted to eat some baked beans, and I knew then that I would be fine. But for those 4 days, I didn't wash, I didn't look after myself. I basically just drank the ultra fuel, rowed, because I was just so keen not to let anybody down and to keep going.
Right.
And the good thing actually was because the first 5 days was so rough, and quite a lot of people, other crews, wanted to give up at that stage because it's a big, massive shock to the system. I basically didn't care that it was really, really rough and quite dangerous at that point, because I was just felt, anybody who's seasick will understand that you just feel so bad. And there was another crew in the race called Latitude 35 with these 4 men who were basically wanting to break a world record. And one of their team members was very seasick, got very dehydrated, and had to be rescued off the boat. And it was quite a dramatic rescue. And another teammate of his thought, well, actually, I'm scared, I want to get off too. So they lost 2 teammates. Yeah.
Did they complete it with
They
2?
did complete it with 2 of them. But that just goes to show that the planning in an expedition is so important, because if we hadn't rowed across the North Sea and realised how sick I was, we wouldn't have got the ultra fuel, and it could have been a very different story for me.
Now, I'm looking at your book, and it described this trip as puke, sleep, puke, row, puke, repeat.
It was for 4 days.
So it must have knocked you out. And I think, well, of course, when you're sick, you're losing your food, you're losing the calorific value of your food.
Yeah.
And with all this physical effort,
Yeah.
surely you needed quite a lot of topping up.
Yes, we did. We were going to lose. We knew that we would need to eat 6,000 calories because we were rowing for 15 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew we had to eat 15,000 calories of food. I don't think we ever did eat that because you lose your appetite. But and we also had snack packs as well. So we'd have three expedition meals and a snack pack
By
throughout the
expedition
day.
meals, are these things that you're dehydrated?
Yeah, so you have to, the race rules state you've got to take 20% wet food, which is baked beans and sausages, so you can eat those cold if you need to, and then we took the rest in dried food. So it was my job to boil the water, and if you've ever had experience of a jet boil, you can imagine sitting on a boat being tossed about with waves crashing over you, trying to light the jet boil, then boiling the water
And pouring it out?
and then pouring it into 2 flasks. So that was my job, and how I didn't burn myself I will never know.
But you when you look at this food and the calorie intake, I noticed at one time you became quite obsessed with baked beans.
Yes, well, baked beans were just very easy to eat because it was the wet food, so you didn't have to boil water, you didn't have
So
to
there's
do
no
anything.
cooking facilities?
No, nothing. It was only boiled water, and we just used to pour it into the expedition food, wait 8 minutes, and then eat it.
So
It was
what-
very
what-
nice, actually.
So what sort of menu was it?
It was Thai curry, pasta. We had a bonus shepherd's pie with 1,000 calories in it, which I found, and I ate it all. I didn't share it with anybody, and it gave me 1,000 calories. It was gorgeous, that shepherd's pie.
But you were supposed to put on weight before you left.
We did, and we did put weight on. We put on about 2 stone.
Really?
Because we knew, we all put weight on. That was really hard, sitting on the sofa eating chocolates and crisps for 6 months. But we all knew we had to put weight on because we knew we would lose weight, and we did. We lost about 1.5 stone. Some of the men, obviously the men in this race, were very big, very muscular. they'd been in the gym, they're lifting weights, they're doing all of that stuff. And when they get to the other side, they lose all their muscle because of their muscle mass just goes because they're not eating enough. And they look very, very different when they get to the other side. They looked haggard, skinny. They look completely different. We basically looked a lot better. We looked probably about 5 years younger when we got to Antigua. We looked quite good.
Yet you had trouble with your legs when you got there.
Yes, we did, because you lose muscles in your calf muscles because you're not walking around. So it took about 5 days for us to be able to walk without falling over, and then it took a while to build up.
Yet you could use your legs for rowing all the time.
Yes, you can, but because you're not walking, you do lose a bit of muscle mass in your legs.
We'll go back to the effects of that hurricane for a moment then. Were there any serious injuries during this period of time as the boat was bouncing about?
Yes, there was. On the crossing, quite early on, it wasn't in the hurricane, but Nikki did fall over and she injured her coccyx. So she ended up having to row like a frog for the rest of the trip because it was so painful. But Frances,
she carried on rowing?
She carried on rowing with a lot of painkillers. And Frances, she got knocked over one day and she kind of garroted herself, and she basically couldn't see for a while. She had to lie down in the cabin, and luckily she was okay, but that was quite a nasty injury. And Nikki had an infected finger, so that had to be lanced by Jeanette. And just at the point that she was lancing a finger, a pod of dolphins swam by, which was good because that lifted our spirits. So yeah, we did have a few injuries.
I presume you had to have some sort of medical training then to take the trip as well, because you had the doctor on board.
We had to do survival. We had to do first aid at sea because we had very, very sore bottoms.
Any blisters? Any sunburn?
No sunburn, actually. No sunburn, but very, very, very sore bottoms. So after every shift, we had to put surgical spirit on our bottoms and Sudocrem. So I now know how babies feel.
Yeah, you lost a lot of. I mean, this storm. It's quite interesting. Losing power and then having to pump water, as I read in your book. That was an extra physical feat that you didn't budget on, isn't it?
No, we lost our power. On Christmas Day, we had a stereo fitted on the boat, and on Christmas Day we were playing Christmas songs to celebrate, and we drained our power, and we didn't realise it took about a week for our battery monitors to go up to volts for things to work. So we had an auto helm on the boat. We had 2, but they burn out very easily because you're not going fast enough. So the auto helm wouldn't work. So we had to hand steer with 2 pieces of rope and the compass for about 1,000 miles. And we had to hand pump our water. So when we came off our rowing shift, instead of resting, we took it in turns to hand pump the water. And we did that for about a week. So that was tough. So again, we just used to say to ourselves, it'll make a good chapter for the book.
Well, you keep talking about the book. Let's maybe have a look at that for a moment, because I've got a copy of it here, and it's a fairly weighty tome of 200 and odd pages. How was that put together? Or
Well, we came up with the idea for the book whilst on the boat. We didn't think about a book before we went. But the book was actually harder to write than maybe Rowing the Ocean, because we all had different visions of how the book should be. So it was actually quite challenging writing the book. So even though we'd really invested a lot of time being friends across the ocean, if we were ever going to fall out, it probably would be writing that book. But we didn't, because we've all come up with something that we're all really happy with. But it's very interesting that 4 people's vision of what happened sometimes is quite different of how we all remember things. So it's quite interesting how the human brain works, really, because we all had very different ideas of how the stories were. But we're really happy with the book. The paperback has just come out, which has got a bonus chapter in it, what's happened next, because after the ocean row, life has never been the same since, really, and we've all had amazing opportunities to do things that we wouldn't normally do. Nikki and Frances have just run the Marathon des Sables. They finished yesterday. So we've all got kind of different projects and ideas that we want to do now. I was hoping that when I'd rowed the ocean, that would be it then. I'd be happy to kind of go back to normal life, but unfortunately that's not the case. And I did actually, in the book, it does actually talk a lot about adrenaline hangover, which I suffered quite badly with, which again we didn't plan for and didn't expect, which is quite interesting.
Well, if you say you're not going to go do another rowing trip, are you?
No, I don't think I would do I might do the Pacific in a few years, because that would take 9 months, and I'd want the children to be gone by then. So I wouldn't say no to another rowing trip, because it was amazing. But my passion now is mountains. So my next expedition will be a mountain expedition, and I've just started again a 12-month training program on mountaineering. Because one thing I've learnt, whatever you do, you've got to be passionate about it. Otherwise, being successful. The thing about the ocean row was we all wanted to do it, and we were all passionate about rowing, and that's what made it work. And I think with the next thing that we do, it will have to be the same, and that's been the problem. All 4 of us can't think of something that we want to do together that we're all passionate about. So we've all kind of gone off and done different things, and my passion is definitely mountains now.
But here you are in the Isle of Man. Your husband's here in the Isle of Man.
Yes, yeah.
And your family, and you are still in Yorkshire.
Yes, we're still there because of the children. The children are still at school. Henry's got 2 or 3 years left to go at school, and then that will give me freedom to join Richard here. So yes, we're living a bit of an unconventional life at the moment. I'm coming here quite a lot, and I love it here because of the ocean, and I look out at the ocean, and it's a beautiful island. So I absolutely love it here. So this is definitely my second home, and I love it.
Good. Well, you come from part of Yorkshire, which is pretty pleasant as well,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah. So all of these things. So what you're saying is that this trip, which turned you from a fairly standard, or a standard may not be the word to use, but a fairly conventional maybe
yeah.
life, into something where you've got something in you now that you can't resist.
Yes, and I think it's not just about the thing with rowing the ocean was as well. It's the people you meet along the way, the journey you have along the way, and the people I've met are so can-do, inspirational people. And I was really keen. I wanted to involve the children in the whole journey because I wanted them to absorb the positive energy from these inspirational people who I've met along the way. And they have done that. And I don't think if I'd said, oh no, I'm not going to do this, which would have been very easy to do, no, I can't do this, then they wouldn't have been exposed to those people and the experiences that they've had. And I want to continue that by doing another challenge and another expedition. And I think showing that a working mum with 2 children, if we can row an ocean, then anybody can do anything. The key is you've just got to want to do it.
Now, we're going to have to stop at this stage, Helen, because we've run out of time on Sunday Opinion. But I can ask you, are you going to stay on and join us again on the Man in Line in quarter past 1?
Definitely,
Well,
definitely.
we can continue our conversation
Great.
then. Because, as I said, it's now time to end this edition of Sunday Opinion, in which we've been hearing about some of the experiences of our studio guest, Helen Butters, who, together with 3 working mums from Yorkshire, the Yorkshire Row, successfully rowed across the Atlantic from the Canaries to Antigua in a 8 metre by 1.5 metre boat.